Today we are going to discuss on this crucial topic on the role of media in HIV/AIDS prevention. We have with us Professor Abdul Wahid Khan as a resource person to discuss on the significance and importance of role of media in HIV/AIDS prevention. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
The journey that you have traveled as coming from a remote village and to have scaled up an illustrious career and attained you have a vast experience. I would also like to mention to the viewers that Dr. Abdul Wahid Khan was also a former Vice Chancellor of Indira Gandhi National Open University, and if you could throw us some light about your journey and so far.
Well, Dr. Mahesh, first of all, I'd like to thank you, and through you, Indira Gandhi National Open University, for inviting me to be here in the studios of the Electronic Media Production Center. It's always a pleasure to be back at IGNOU. As you mentioned, I served IGNOU in different capacities, including Director of Communications Division. At that time, it wasn't known as Electronic Media Production Center, so I still know it as Communications Division. And later, I served as the Vice Chancellor of this very important university. And I'm, in fact, of all the positions that I've held, perhaps I'm most proud of my association with Indira Gandhi National Open University. So I'm delighted to have this opportunity of coming to IGNOU and participating in your program. As you mentioned in your introductory remarks, I come from a very remote village. In fact, I've just come back from that village only day before yesterday. This village is in eastern UP on Indo-Nepal border. It's a sad commentary on our development that the village remains a very remote village with very poor road connections, with erratic electricity supply, with no drinking water supply, with no sanitation facilities. But its land is very productive, it's very fertile. The irrigation sources are quite adequate. So it is not a poor village as such, really, but a remote village, as if it is frozen in history and geography of this land. And I did my primary education from the school in that village, and then my other junior high school education also in a nearby village, for which I used to walk several kilometers every day, crossing 3 different riverlets, and then moved on to the district town and ended up actually, since I was from a farm family, I studied agriculture. Okay. Basically, the ambition was to become an agricultural extension officer. Okay. Before that, in fact, I tried getting admission in a veterinary college. So that did not happen because I was underage for that admission. So I studied agriculture. I did my bachelor's degree and master's degree in agriculture, and that's how I became interested, because the college was producing new information and new innovations in agriculture, but the practices in agriculture in the village were very traditional, same old practices that they had perhaps from God knows ages. So I became interested in communicating new ideas and innovations in agriculture to farmers. That's how I developed interest in communication. And progressively, gradually, I moved into the field of agriculture communication and mass communication. And went to the University of Wisconsin, which was known for its combined program in agriculture and communication, and called agricultural communication. I ended up doing my master's, another master's in agriculture journalism, and then PhD in mass communication. So my interest in communication grew out of realization that people living in remote villages really do not have access to information and knowledge about new agriculture and rural development. So that was the route that I took to specialize in that area. And when I returned to India way back in 1973, I had a very good opportunity of setting up an agriculture communication center at Pantnagar Agriculture University. Then I moved on to All India Radio to be the director of form broadcasting. From there, the journey took me to Bangladesh and Nepal, working as a UN expert in communications and development communication. And then I ended up coming to Indira Gandhi National Open University. I was part of the initial team that created or established the university. And then the life has taken its normal course of my assignment at UNESCO as Assistant Director General and, of course, Vice Chancellor of IGNOU. So that's in brief the journey that you were talking about.
It's quite interesting to hear a person who has come from a remote village, scaled up to have achieved what you are today, and also your specialization in communication and ICT. Something, if we can also juxtapose the same your experience over other issues such as HIV/AIDS, we would like to look at what role media can play, especially in HIV/AIDS prevention.
Dr. Mahesh, as you mentioned, there is no cure or a vaccine as of now for HIV and AIDS. And I don't have to tell you, you are an expert on the subject. It is a major health issue, particularly in Africa and parts of Asia, and even in developed countries. So to say that this is a disease of only developing countries and would not be correct. And in view of the fact that it is a major health issue and there is no vaccine for it, it is the prevention that is perhaps the most important aspect.
Paramount, yeah.
Now, prevention has to do with the change in people's attitudes, change in people's behavior. But the change in attitude and behavior does not occur unless there is an awareness of the issue. So, media plays a very, very important role in creating awareness of the problem, in bringing about attitudinal change and resulting in behavioral change. That is essentially what one would like to see happen, essentially. But starting with the awareness to attitudinal change, to behavioral change, this is the route that normally the media plays a role in bringing about change in society on any issue. And HIV/AIDS is clearly one of the very important issues of our time today. In addition to that, I think media has a very important role in directing the policies of the government that be. That means it is, if it is on the agenda, look at, for example, the question of environment or sustainable development. Now, people were not talking about environmental issues or sustainable development, say a couple of decades ago.
Absolutely.
It has risen to the fore. Of late, there has been a lot of media attention given to the issue of environmental degradation and the need for a sustainable development and so on. Now, from being nowhere on the development agenda to the front of the development agenda, I believe media has played its important role. The same, in my view, is true of the role of media in HIV and AIDS. Because if it is forgotten, if it is left out, if it is not an agenda of the mainstream media or community media, etc., then it is, media has a peculiar way of legitimizing what is on it and delegitimizing or relegating it to a secondary importance which is not covered by it. So media plays a very, very important role, but as you rightly said, media is just a tool like any other tool, and its impact is determined by how you use it. A tool is a tool, and its impact or its effect is based on your ability to use that tool effectively. And that's why it is important that people understand how to use media for preventive education on HIV and AIDS.
Definitely, we have a tool which can address this burning issue on HIV/AIDS, but somehow this tool also requires some kind of a regulation in terms of how this tool can be used in such a way that it communicates the right message to the larger audience. Often we see that there are instances about media also sometimes overdoing this issue in terms of sensationalizing it, or probably because of lack of ignorance from the part of the technical persons, how to handle the situations without putting it into a perspective, but highlighting about an individual person suffering from HIV/AIDS and the ramifications it can bring in. It is also a concern. So what is the kind of demarcation one has to have in terms of, we talk about self-regulation in media, but there should be also clear guidelines not only for issues like HIV/AIDS, but when we are addressing issues on vulnerable population, especially women and children, we have to have certain minimum ethics. Yeah. So if you could, from your experience, if you could give us a perspective where this whole debate about media and the ethical norms.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. A tool can be used to create a positive impact, but the same tool can also be used to create a negative impact on society in general. It is unfortunate that sometimes media use sensationalization as a way of getting the information across. Somehow they have convinced that unless you sensationalize the information, people will not pay attention. I mean, the example of that would be, I'm amazed how often in the mainstream media they use breaking news. Okay. The word breaking news should be reserved for really a very, very important news item, not for any item and every item on the news media. But because of the fierce competition between different channels and because of the proliferation of channels and the desire to grab the eyeballs so that you have larger audiences, in order to the media seem to have convinced that by lowering the standards, by giving sensational news, they will have more people watching their programs. And therefore, personally, I believe that it is an unfortunate development that the standards have been lowered in that sense. And especially on issues such as HIV and AIDS, which are sensitive issues, have to do with the behavior of the people, etc., etc. If such a sensitive subject is not treated with care, with deep concern, with the responsibility that comes as a media person, that you are giving that information that may have a negative impact, I think it can cause some societal problems and issues. Now, like any other issue, you can train people to handle a subject in an appropriate manner, in a responsible manner, in a professional manner. Because media requires a very professional approach, whether it's in the area of education, information, or entertainment. These are the three primary functions of a media. No matter what area that you are responsible for, you must carry out that responsibility in a very professional manner. Professionalism is something that is not acquired by birth. Professionalism is something that you acquire through education and training, and there is no reason why. I mean, it is particularly in this area that when I was Assistant Director General for UNESCO in Paris, that we launched a very major project of training young television producers in HIV/AIDS in particular. And we started this in Africa. The idea was that, first of all, a producer has to understand the ramifications of the subject that she or he is handling. Okay. Now, that information, you cannot be an expert on every subject, but you can learn to a degree at least the major issues of a topic. So giving them some exposure to different aspects of HIV and AIDS, and particularly the behavioral aspect and its impact on practices that may have a positive impact on individuals' behavior. Then you mentioned about the stigma that HIV and AIDS patients, or those who have who are affected by HIV and AIDS, the society looks at them as people who may pass on the disease to somebody else, and there are all kinds of misgivings, misinformation, and misconception about how one contracts the disease. Now, if you do not counter these misperceptions and misgivings and misinformation through effective use of media, then you are not also doing your duty properly. I mean, the stigma that this disease has kind of acquired needs to be tackled. Now, how do you treat the subject in a sensitive and responsible way is something that you can learn. So this is another area that we covered in our television training programs of young television producers in Asia and Africa. We brought them together because if you're doing this program production by yourself, you do this by practicing what you know or what you've learned, what you have seen from. But when you bring people in an environment where they come from different cultures, different settings, different broadcasting organizations, and allow them to discuss these issues among themselves as professionals. Then you learn the best practices from each other. So you compile the best practices that you were talking about, the regulations. Regulations play an important role. However, perhaps the most effective way is to learn from each other's best practices and then incorporate and include those practices in your day-to-day professional work. So that was the third element was that, I mean, television production, as colleagues here would know, is a resource-intensive exercise. So what we did was that they came, wrote scripts, went back and produced programs. Then they came back to review those programs. Those programs were critiqued. And then they went back to edit and finally produce those programs. And the final program production was then shared. It was like a cooperative. If you have produced 2 programs and I have produced 2 programs, you give 2 of yours and I give 2 of mine, and then we are richer by, you know, they are, and so many producers were doing this in so many different countries, and we allowed those programs to be then shared and of course dubbed in the local language later. But that is how this program really took off, and it was noticed by UNAIDS and other organizations, and we had very strong support for this initiative from UNESCO.
Given the importance of information, education and communication, especially when there is no likely cure for HIV/AIDS, and it has now become a chronic manageable disease, the apex body in our country, that is National AIDS Control Organization, has seriously looked at this issue of IEC, and it is an important component, especially under the National AIDS Control Program, which has now come. There has been 3 phases, and now the 4th phase is going on. So even the government recognizes the need for information, education and communication, and now probably at the advent of technology, newer technologies are coming. We are talking about social media, we are talking about, but is all these tools are centric to urban population, or still there is a barrier how rural populations could be reached and communicated with this kind of a message?
I think this is a very, very important question, Dr. Mahesh, because I mentioned earlier that communication today is very, very vital in society. And thanks to the advances in information and communication technology today, you have proliferation of different kinds of mobile technology, internet, of course, good old radio and television and the print media and word of mouth still. I mentioned in the very beginning that my interest in communication was from the point of view of the rural audiences.
Okay.
That common thread is throughout my career I have retained that interest, because communicating with urban audiences, educated audiences, sophisticated audiences, or so-called elites is relatively much easier. You know, because not only because they have access to multiple communication channels, but also that those who are practicing media profession, they speak the same language. That means you share the common communications background, whether it's language, method of expression, the the way you treat a subject, the way you present a subject, etc., etc. But to communicate with the rural audience is a very different and more difficult job, I have to say. I was working for UNESCO in Bangladesh, and I was responsible for training broadcasters who were working in the area of rural broadcasting. And we invited some very well-known producers to a training program. We asked them to produce a set of programs.
Okay.
Then we recorded those programs on a cassette. And then we took those producers and played those programs to the rural audiences in the villages of Bangladesh and recorded their reaction of the audience right in presence of the producers. It was quite an eye-opener for them that what they thought were the most creative ways of getting the information across did not succeed in reaching the minds of those villagers, the rural audiences. Because then they realized that the language that they had used, the method of presentation they had used, were all very good for the urban audiences,
okay,
but not so effective for the rural audiences. And they themselves had said that it was an eye-opener for them. And I had a life in All India Radio, and at that time, of course, television and radio were together. This was in 70s, mid-70s and so on. And most producers or people who are in the business of presenting information, that is news or entertainment, largely come from urban backgrounds.
Absolutely.
And therefore they have difficulty really relating to the rural audiences. Not only that you have challenges that many people even today in villages do not have access to television. Certainly what we take for granted and is our survival, almost day-to-day survival, is challenging if you lose internet, which I did this morning. You feel that something is amiss, that something is, you are dysfunctional because there is. How many people in the rural areas have internet connectivity? Very few. The technology that is perhaps most pervasive today among the mass media, it's radio. And second would be perhaps television. But mobile telephones are very widely available, and these are personal communication tools. Unlike the mass media such as radio and television, newspapers and magazines and so on and so forth.
Hope the viewers who are with us so far would have enjoyed viewing and also hearing the opinions about Dr. A.W. Khan. Thank you, sir.